A single piece of linen challenges everything we think we know. This is the Shroud of Turin, a fragile cloth bearing the ghostly imprint of a crucified man. Is this the actual burial shroud of Jesus Christ, or is it the most ingenious forgery ever created? For centuries, this relic has stood at the crossroads of faith and reason, a puzzle that has resisted every attempt at a final answer. By the end of this journey, you will see all the evidence laid bare, from a shocking scientific test that seemed to solve the mystery to discoveries that unraveled it all over again. We will explore how a medieval forgery could possess photographic qualities centuries before the camera, and why bloodstains on the cloth continue to baffle forensic experts. This is an investigation into history's greatest unsolved mystery. What does it take for an object to become a legend? Our story truly begins not in ancient Jerusalem, but in a small French town in the middle of the 14th century. The year was 1354. A French knight named Geoffroy de Charny, a man known for his piety and his military service, reportedly presented a remarkable cloth to a church in the town of Liry. He claimed it was the true burial shroud of Christ, but there was no grand procession, no ancient chain of custody stretching back through the centuries. The shroud simply appeared as if from nowhere. This sudden emergence, with no historical paper trail leading to the Holy Land, is the first and perhaps greatest red flag for skeptics. Imagine discovering a priceless, world-changing artifact in your attic with no receipt, no old letters mentioning it, nothing. That was the shroud's debut onto the world stage. The local bishop, Henry de Poitiers, was immediately suspicious. He launched an investigation and concluded the image was not a miracle, but a clever piece of artistry. He declared it a painting, a man-made object created to trick the faithful and attract pilgrims and their donations. This official condemnation from the church itself, recorded at the very moment of the shroud's first appearance, forms the bedrock of the forgery theory. Why would a relic of such immense importance surface in medieval France, over 1,000 miles from where the event supposedly occurred, and over 1,300 years after the fact? Its silence throughout all of recorded Christian history is a deafening one. For many, this gap is simply too wide to bridge with faith alone. It suggests a creation story not in the 1st century, but in the 14th, a time when the trade in religious relics, both genuine and fabricated, was a booming and sometimes shady business. The shroud entered history not with a whisper of ancient mystery, but with the loud controversy of a potential fraud, a puzzle that was challenging from its very first moment in the light. Yet the object itself defies that simple verdict of fraud. To understand why, you must look closely at what the cloth actually shows. Unfolded, the Shroud of Turin is a single sheet of linen over 14 feet long and 3.5 feet wide. Its most haunting feature is the faint, sepia-toned imprint of a naked man, front and back, laid head to head as if the body was sandwiched within the cloth. The figure is tall and powerfully built with a beard and long hair, but it is the details that stop you cold. The entire body is covered with what appear to be small, dumbbell-shaped wounds, consistent with the Roman flagrum, a whip tipped with pieces of metal or bone. There is a deep wound on the side, as if from a spear thrust. The wrists and feet show distinct stains from piercing, not through the palms as traditional art depicts, but through the wrists, a medically accurate point that would support the weight of a body on a cross. Perhaps most chilling are the marks around the head, suggesting a cap of sharp thorns, and the rivulets of what forensic experts identify as blood, flowing in anatomically correct paths from the wounds. But here is where the mystery deepens beyond any medieval artist's skill. The image is not a painting. Under magnification, scientists found no brushstrokes, no pigment, no binder of any kind. The coloration exists only on the very topmost threads of the linen, a mere whisper of a stain. It has no directionality, it does not soak into the fibers. It is, in essence, a perfect superficial scorch, and then there is its most bizarre property. To the naked eye, the image is a blurry, ghostly negative. It was only in 1898 when an amateur photographer named Secondo Pia first took a picture of the shroud that the world saw the truth. His photographic negative revealed a stunningly clear and detailed positive image, a face of serene and haunting depth. This was a quality utterly unknown to science until the 19th century. How could a forger in the 1300s create a perfect photographic negative, a concept that would not exist for another 500 years, using a method that left no trace of paint or dye? The image itself, in its silent, impossible detail, asks a question that mere history cannot easily answer. This ghostly negative image demanded a modern answer, and in 1988, science delivered what seemed to be the final verdict. The Shroud of Turin was subjected to the most trusted dating method in archaeology, radiocarbon dating. 3 of the world's most prestigious laboratories in Oxford, Zurich, and Tucson were each given a tiny postage stamp-sized sample cut from a single corner of the linen. The process is based on a simple, elegant principle. All living things absorb a tiny, consistent amount of radioactive carbon-14 from the atmosphere. When they die, that absorption stops and the carbon-14 begins to decay at a known, steady rate. By measuring how much carbon-14 remains in an ancient piece of cloth or bone, scientists can calculate when the plant was harvested or the animal died. The labs worked independently under strict protocols, and their results were unanimous and shocking. They dated the flax used to weave the shroud to between 1260 and 1390 Anno Domini, with a 95% confidence level. The timeline was precise, and it pointed directly to the very century the cloth first appeared in historical records in France. For many, the case was closed. The headline was irresistible: medieval forgery confirmed. The mysterious, impossible image was simply a clever, if inexplicable, creation of the Middle Ages, a time of profound religious fervor and ingenious craftsmanship. It seemed the centuries-old debate had been settled not by theologians but by the cold, impartial logic of atomic physics. The mystery, it appeared, was solved. Yet the story did not end there. Almost immediately, a chorus of voices rose in protest, not just from the faithful, but from researchers and historians. They raised a critical question: what if the sample itself was flawed? The shroud had survived a severe fire in the 1600s which had scorched it, drenched it in molten silver, and soaked it with water used to fight the flames. Could that event have contaminated the linen's carbon signature, making it appear centuries younger? Others pointed to the sampling location, a single, heavily handled edge that might have been repaired or rewoven by medieval nuns, essentially testing a patch rather than the original fabric. The scientific community stood by its results, but the controversy revealed a deeper truth. When an object carries this much weight, this much meaning, a single data point, no matter how robust, rarely feels like the final word. The carbon dating didn't end the mystery. It simply divided it into 2 opposing camps: those who trusted the science of the sample and those who questioned the history of the cloth itself. The carbon dating results created a firm line in the sand, but that line has been blurred by persistent questions about the cloth's complex history. Critics of the 1988 tests argue the process was scientifically sound, but the sample itself was fundamentally compromised. They point to the fire of 1532, a catastrophe that nearly destroyed the relic. Trapped inside a silver casket within a burning chapel, the shroud was exposed to extreme heat, soot, and a torrent of water that left parts of it scorched, soaked, and even fused with molten metal. This event, they propose, introduced a massive amount of new carbon into the linen's fibers. Imagine taking a piece of ancient parchment and carefully charring its edges in a modern fireplace, then trying to date it. The test would inevitably reflect the date of the soot and smoke, not the original parchment. Could the fire have reset the shroud's carbon clock, making a 1st century cloth appear medieval. Another compelling theory focuses not on the fire but on human hands. The sample was taken from a single peripheral corner, an area that would have been handled constantly over centuries during displays. Some textile experts suggest this corner was the most likely place for a discreet medieval repair, an invisible reweave done by skilled nuns to reinforce a frayed edge. If true, the labs would have been dating a piece of thread from the 1300s, while the main body of the cloth could be far older. This is not just speculation. Microscopic analysis of the sampled area has shown a different weave pattern, and the presence of cotton fibers not found elsewhere on the main shroud hints of a possible patch. Perhaps the most fascinating challenge comes from the world of microbiology. Researchers have proposed that over centuries of handling, the linen developed a thin, invisible biofilm, a layer of bacteria and fungal growth coating the threads. This living layer, composed of modern carbon, could have acted like a veneer, tricking the machines into seeing a much younger date. In 2019, a team of scientists took a different approach. Instead of cutting the cloth, they analyzed microscopic dust particles vacuumed from its surface during earlier examinations. Using a combination of techniques, including spectroscopy and mechanical analysis, they studied these particles and suggested the linen's properties were consistent with fabrics from the 1st century, around the time of Jesus. While not a direct dating method, this study reopened a door the carbon tests had seemed to slam shut. The lesson here is profound. Science gives us powerful tools, but those tools are only as reliable as the material we feed into them. The carbon date is a fact, but it is a fact about a specific, tiny, and historically traumatized piece of fabric. Whether that fact speaks for the entire shroud remains an open and deeply contentious question. The scientific duel over the shroud's image is matched only by the fierce debate over its most visceral feature, the blood. If the ghostly body imprint is a puzzle, the dark, rust-colored stains are a crime scene. In the 1970s and 80s, a team of American scientists led by chemist Dr. Alan Adler and pathologist Dr. John Heller subjected microscopic threads from the bloodstains to a battery of advanced tests. Their conclusions were startling. They reported finding not just the chemical signature of blood, but specific components of human blood. They identified hemoglobin, the protein that carries oxygen, and its breakdown product, methemoglobin. More compellingly, they found traces of bilirubin, a yellow pigment released by the liver under conditions of extreme stress and trauma. This detail is critical because a crucified man suffering from brutal torture and shock would have elevated levels of bilirubin in his blood. The forensic picture grew even more intricate when they examined the stains under high magnification. Each bloodstain is surrounded by a clear yellowish ring, a serum halo. In medical terms, this is exactly what happens when real blood clots. The red cells and platelets congeal into a solid mass, while the clear, watery serum separates and seeps out into the surrounding fabric. These halos are not something a medieval artist would know to paint or even know existed. They are a microscopic diary of a real biological event captured in linen. For many researchers, this evidence is the most powerful argument against forgery. How could a medieval artisan without any knowledge of hematology perfectly replicate the complex forensic signature of tortured human blood, down to the chemical markers of extreme stress and the precise behavior of clotting serum? Yet every piece of this evidence has been met with a formidable counter-argument. The most prominent skeptic, microanalyst Walter Macrone, approached the same threads with a different set of tools and reached the opposite verdict. Using polarized light microscopy, Macrone argued that the blood areas were, in fact, composed of artists' pigments. He reported finding particles of red ochre, an iron oxide earth pigment, and vermilion, a mercuric sulfide pigment, both commonly used in medieval painting. In his view, the shroud was exactly what the Bishop of Troyes declared in the 1300s, a clever painting. Macron dismissed the hemoglobin findings, suggesting Adler's team had been misled by contaminants or by the chemical similarity between blood and certain pigments. This created a stalemate at the molecular level. Two groups of respected scientists looking at the same material saw two entirely different realities. One saw the complex chemistry of life and death, the other saw the simple materials of an artist's studio. The debate often hinges on a single, frustrating point: contamination. The shroud has been handled, kissed, doused in water, and exposed to smoke over hundreds of years. Could medieval paint pigments have been transferred onto the cloth by accident, or could the chemicals from the fire have created false positives for blood? Proponents of the blood theory point out that later, more sensitive tests using immunology have detected human albumin, another key blood protein, and that the iron found in the bloodstains is chemically bound in a form specific to blood, not to simple ochre pigment. The duel continues unresolved. It presents us with a profound choice. Do we see in these stains the tragic residue of a historical execution, preserved with impossible fidelity? Or do we see the cunning work of a forger who, by incredible luck or intuition, used materials that would later mimic the forensic profile of real blood? The answer you find in the blood depends entirely on which microscope you choose to look through. While the chemical battle rages, the fabric itself holds a quieter, more tangible kind of evidence. The Shroud of Turin is woven from linen in a complex pattern known as a 3/1 herringbone twill. This is not a simple, common weave. Picture the threads not just going over and under each other in a basic grid, but in a diagonal, zigzag pattern where each weft thread passes over 3 warp threads, then under one, creating a distinct textured appearance. This specific, sophisticated technique was known in the ancient world, but it was expensive and time-consuming, reserved for high-status textiles. For decades, this weave was seen as an anomaly with no clear parallel. Then, in the 1990s, textile archaeologist Dr. Mechthild Fleury Lemberg made a startling observation. During a conservation project on the shroud, she noted that the seam running along one side, a selvage seam, was sewn with a unique, extinct stitch method. She had seen this exact stitch only once before, on textiles found at the fortress of Masada in Israel. Masada is famous as the site of a Jewish revolt against the Roman Empire, a siege that ended in the year 73 Anno Domini. The textiles found there were securely dated to the 1st century. The match was precise, not just in the type of stitch, but in the meticulous, almost invisible way it was executed. This was not a general similarity, it was a specific technical fingerprint shared across a vast gulf of time and space. A medieval European forger, even a skilled one, would have no reason or knowledge to replicate an obscure 1st century Judean sewing technique. This tiny, silent seam whispers a story of origin that contradicts the carbon date, suggesting a thread of continuity stretching back to the ancient Levant. This botanical evidence grows even more intriguing and more controversial with the work of pollen. In the 1970s, Swiss criminologist and botanist Max Frey was given permission to tape samples of dust from the surface of the shroud. Under his microscope, he identified dozens of different pollen grains trapped in the linen fibers. Pollen is incredibly durable, with a hard outer shell that can survive for millennia, and each plant species produces pollen with a unique, identifiable shape. Frey claimed his analysis revealed a travelogue written in microscopic spores. He reported finding pollen from plant species that grow only in the area around Jerusalem and the Dead Sea Basin, plants like the tumbleweed and the tamarisk. He also identified pollen from plants native to the Anatolian region of Turkey and from Europe, tracing what he believed was the shroud's historical journey from Jerusalem to Constantinople, then to France and Italy. If correct, this was monumental evidence. It would place the shroud physically in the Holy Land long before its medieval appearance in Europe, directly challenging the carbon dating narrative. However, Frey's findings have been heavily scrutinized. Critics point out that his sampling method, using adhesive tape, could have easily picked up modern contaminants. Pollen is airborne and ubiquitous. It could have settled on the cloth during any of its many public exhibitions over the centuries. Furthermore, some of the plant species he identified have much wider ranges than he claimed, and other botanists have questioned his specific classifications. After his death, his original samples were re-examined, and while some confirmed the presence of Middle Eastern pollen types, the certainty of his conclusion was diluted. The pollen evidence, much like every other piece of this puzzle, is compelling but not conclusive. It offers a tantalizing possibility, a faint botanical whisper of ancient deserts and distant journeys, yet it remains just out of reach of definitive proof. It reminds us that the shroud is not an isolated object but a traveler through time, collecting the dust of centuries, a dust that holds many stories, not all of them its own. The blood and the weave tell one kind of story, but the image itself whispers a completely different and far stranger tale. This is the true heart of the enigma. In 1978, a team of over 40 American scientists, the Shroud of Turin Research Project, was granted unprecedented access to the relic for 120 hours of non-stop, around-the-clock testing. They brought with them tons of the most advanced equipment available, from ultraviolet scanners to spectrometers to microscopes. Their mission was simple: to treat the shroud as an unknown artifact and apply every forensic tool at their disposal to answer one question: what is this thing made of? What they found, or more accurately, what they did not find, sent shockwaves through the scientific community. After days of intense analysis, they reached a unanimous and baffling conclusion. The image is not a painting. There are no brushstrokes. There is no layer of pigment, no dye, no stain, and no binder like egg or oil that would hold a painting together. Under extreme magnification, the coloration exists only on the very topmost micron of each linen thread, like a sunburn on the surface of the fiber. It does not soak in, it does not follow the twist of the thread. It is a superficial change in the cellulose of the flax itself, a chemical degradation that resembles the faint, yellowed browning you might see on a piece of paper left too long in the sun, or a very mild, controlled scorch from a burst of intense energy. Think of it this way: if you spill coffee on a white shirt, the liquid soaks deep into the fabric, darkening it from the inside out. The shroud's image is the opposite. It is as if someone took a laser and, with impossible precision, changed only the very surface of the threads in just the right places to form a picture without damaging the cloth beneath. But the strangeness goes even deeper. When researchers analyzed the darkness of the image, they made a discovery that defies all logic of art. In a normal painting or photograph, the darkness of a shadow corresponds to how much dye or light is present. It is a two-dimensional representation of light and dark. On the shroud, the darkness of the image directly correlates to the distance between the cloth and the body it covered. The darker the imprint, like the tip of the nose or the brow, the closer the linen was to the skin. The lighter areas, like the hollow of the cheeks, were farther away. This means the image contains encoded three-dimensional information, a topographical map of a human form. Using this data, scientists were able to feed the image light and dark values into a device called a VP8 image analyzer, a machine originally designed to interpret satellite photos of planetary terrain. The result was not a flat picture, but a fully rendered, three-dimensional sculpture of a man's face and body, with perfectly natural depth and contours. No painting in history from any era possesses this property. A medieval forger would have had to understand concepts of photogrammetry and three-dimensional data encoding that were millennia beyond his time, and then execute it using a method that left no physical material behind. So we are left with the central, haunting question that has defined this mystery for decades. If it was not painted, not dyed, not stained, and not applied by any known artistic technique, How was this incredibly detailed photographic quality, three-dimensional image of a crucified man created on a piece of first-century linen? The answer seems to lie not in the realm of art, but in the borderlands of physics and something far more mysterious. Faced with this impossible image, science must either find a new answer or accept an old one. One theory, standing at the very edge of physics and faith, proposes a single cataclysmic event, a burst of energy so intense and focused it left behind a perfect three-dimensional shadow. This is the radiation hypothesis. The idea suggests that at the precise moment of resurrection, the body within the shroud released a massive, directed flash of light or particle radiation, perhaps protons or neutrons. This energy would have been emitted outward in all directions like a spherical pulse. Where the body was in direct contact with the linen, the energy transfer would have been strongest, causing a deeper chemical change in the fibers. Where the cloth draped a few inches away, the energy would have been weaker, creating a fainter mark. In an instant, this would have scorched a perfect, three-dimensional negative onto the cloth, mapping the distance between the body and the linen with sub-millimeter precision. It would explain everything: the superficial coloration only on the topmost fibers, the lack of any pigment or brushstrokes, and most strikingly, the encoded depth information that baffled scientists. The image would be, in essence, a radioactive shadowgraph, a photograph created by the body itself. This theory has been championed by physicists like Dr. John Jackson of the Shroud of Turin research project. He and others have worked through complex mathematical models showing how such a burst, lasting perhaps a billionth of a second, could theoretically produce the observed effect without burning or destroying the delicate linen. It is an attempt to find a physical mechanism for a miracle, to give the language of resurrection a vocabulary in particle physics. The most compelling experimental support comes from the work of researchers like the late Paolo di Lazzaro and his team at Italy's National Agency for New Technologies. Using powerful excimer lasers which emit pulses of ultraviolet light, they aimed at single threads of linen. They discovered that with an incredibly brief, intense pulse, they could reproduce the exact same type of superficial discoloration seen on the shroud, a yellowing of the very top layer of the fiber without any charring. They could even control the shade by adjusting the laser's intensity, mimicking the light and dark tones of the image. Crucially, they found this effect only works within an extremely narrow window of energy. Too weak does nothing, too strong burns a hole. The shroud's image, they concluded, would require a burst of vacuum ultraviolet light, a type of radiation not producible by any known technology before the 20th century, and delivered with a coherence and control we still cannot master today. Their experiments are profound, but they also highlight the gap between theory and reality. They can create the right type of mark on a single thread, but they cannot begin to replicate the scale, the complexity, or the coherent information of a full human image. The laser provides a plausible brush, but not the guiding hand of an artist, so we are left with a haunting possibility. The radiation hypothesis offers the most scientifically coherent explanation for the image's physical properties, a perfect marriage of the mysterious data and a single supernatural cause. It transforms the shroud from a potential artifact into a potential event, a frozen moment of transfiguration recorded in atomic detail on a simple sheet of linen. Whether one sees this as a daring scientific hypothesis or a modern description of divine power, it stands as the ultimate challenge to the idea of a medieval forgery. What artist in any age could paint with a particle accelerator, but radiation is not the only natural force that could have left its mark. Another compelling theory steps away from the miraculous and into the chemistry of decay, proposing that the image was formed not in a flash of light but over days through a slow, natural process known as the Maillard reaction. You experience this reaction every time you toast bread or sear a steak. It is the chemical dance between sugars and amino acids that creates the delicious golden brown crust on baked goods and grilled meat. In the context of the shroud, the theory suggests a similar, though far more somber, process. A human body, in the first stages of decomposition, releases volatile amines, compounds derived from proteins. The linen of the shroud, made from flax, is rich in carbohydrates or sugars. Proponents like chemist Raymond Rogers argue that if a body was tightly wrapped in the cloth for 1 to 3 days, these amines could have slowly diffused from the skin, reacting with the carbohydrates in the very top layers of the linen fibers. This reaction would produce a complex suite of yellowish-brown polymers, creating a faint caramelized stain exactly where the body touched the cloth. The image would be, in essence, a chemical photograph of contact. This theory elegantly explains some of the shroud's most stubborn mysteries. It accounts for the image superficiality because the reaction would only occur on the surface of the threads where the gases made contact. It explains the lack of any pigments or dyes because the color comes from a chemical change within the cellulose itself. Some researchers add another layer, suggesting the burial spices mentioned in the Gospel of John, aloe and myrrh, could have acted as a mordant or a catalyst, enhancing the reaction and helping to fix the image onto the cloth. This presents a powerful, naturalistic alternative, one that requires no divine intervention or advanced technology, just the quiet, inevitable chemistry of a body returning to dust. Yet for all its elegance, the Maillard theory struggles with the sheer precision of the image it is asked to explain. The reaction is a diffusion process, meaning the gases would spread out from the body in a blurry, indistinct way, like a drop of ink spreading on a paper towel. The image on the shroud, however, shows razor-sharp details, individual strands of hair, the subtle contours of lips and eyelids, and the distinct scourge marks that are only millimeters wide. A diffuse chemical process would blur these features into a vague, shapeless stain. More critically, the Maillard theory cannot account for the image's three-dimensional information. A contact-based chemical reaction would be strongest where the cloth was pressed directly against the skin, like the shoulders or the back, but it would not and could not encode how far the cloth was from the body in other areas. It has no way of knowing that the tip of the nose was a quarter inch closer than the hollow of the cheek. The reaction would simply stain the cloth based on contact pressure and time, not on precise distance. The result would be a flat, two-dimensional stain, not the topographical map that scientists extracted using the VP8 analyzer. So while the Maillard reaction offers a beautiful and scientifically sound mechanism for creating a faint body imprint, it seems insufficient to generate the specific, high-fidelity, encoded image we see on the shroud. It can create a shadow, but not a perfect, three-dimensional photograph. This leaves us at another crossroads between a natural process that feels right but falls short, and a supernatural one that fits the data but defies our understanding of the possible. Faced with the shroud's impossible qualities, skeptics have proposed ingenious solutions rooted in medieval ingenuity rather than modern physics. One of the most persistent theories is the bas-relief method. Imagine a skilled artisan in a 14th century workshop, carving a detailed stone statue of a crucified man, or perhaps casting a metal bas-relief. The theory suggests they would then soak the linen in a thin solution of aloe or myrrh, press it tightly over the heated surface of the sculpture, and let it dry. The heat and the organic compounds would interact, creating a faint, caramelized stain on the cloth, a direct transfer from the raised surfaces. This method could theoretically produce a negative image, and it uses materials readily available at the time. It is a clever idea, one that speaks to the remarkable craftsmanship of the medieval period, yet when put to the test, it fails to capture the shroud's reality. A cloth pressed over a rigid statue would produce a flat, two-dimensional projection. It would lack the subtle, three-dimensional distance information encoded in the shroud's image, where the darkness varies with millimeter-perfect precision based on how far the cloth draped from the body. A statue's unyielding surface cannot replicate the gentle, variable space between a linen sheet and a human form lying at rest. Furthermore, the resulting image would show distortions, especially around the sides of the face and body, where the cloth would stretch and warp as it was pressed over a solid object. The shroud's image shows no such distortions. It is anatomically flawless from every angle. An even more fascinating artistic hypothesis is the acid painting or camera obscura theory. This idea casts the medieval forger as a proto-photographer, centuries ahead of his time. Proponents suggest the artist could have created a primitive camera obscura, a dark room with a small hole that projects an inverted image of a model or a corpse onto a wall. They would then drape the linen, coated with a light-sensitive substance like silver nitrate or a mixture of urine and sulfuric acid, onto that wall, exposing it to the projected image. Over time, sunlight or another light source would cause the chemicals to darken, burning the image into the cloth. This theory is compelling because it directly addresses the shroud's photographic negative quality, something no other medieval art theory can explain. It paints a picture of a forgotten genius, a Da Vinci-like figure experimenting with chemistry and optics in secret. But again, the forensic evidence on the cloth itself contradicts this narrative. The Shroud of Turin research project's exhaustive analysis found no trace of any such chemical medium on the linen fibers. There is no silver, no nitrate, no residue of organic compounds used in such a process. The image is not a coating, it is a chemical change within the cellulose itself. Additionally, a chemical development process would almost certainly leave directional brushstrokes or pooling where the solution was applied, yet the image coloration is perfectly uniform and non-directional. Perhaps most damning is the three-dimensional data. A camera obscura projection, like a painting, is a flat representation of light and shadow. It contains no inherent information about the distance between the subject and the cloth. It cannot create the precise topographical map that scientists extracted. These artistic theories are brilliant exercises in historical imagination, and they honor the cleverness of the human mind, but they ultimately stumble over the same stubborn facts. The shroud's image possesses specific, quantifiable properties that no known medieval technique, no matter how advanced, could have produced. The cloth itself acts as a silent witness, its fibers holding evidence that points away from the artist's studio and toward a mystery far more profound. But perhaps the most startling detail of all is one you could hold in your own hand. Look closely at the image of the face on the shroud, particularly over the closed eyes. Some researchers claim to see faint circular impressions there, each about the size of a small coin. This observation ignited a theory that is as specific as it is astonishing: the suggestion that first-century Jewish burial customs placed coins on the eyes of the deceased, and that the shroud captured the imprint of those very coins. If true, this would not only date the cloth with pinpoint accuracy, but also tie it directly to a historical figure, the Roman prefect who presided over the trial of Jesus. The primary researcher behind this claim was Father Francis Filas, a Jesuit professor at Loyola University. In the 1960s and 70s, he spent countless hours studying high-resolution photographs of the shroud's face. Over the right eye, he identified a series of markings that he believed matched a specific coin, a lepton or widow's mite, minted in Judea under Pontius Pilate between the years 29 and 32 Anno Domini. These tiny bronze coins were the smallest denomination in circulation, often used by the poor. Filas argued that one marking resembled a litus, a curved staff used by Roman augurs, a symbol known to appear on Pilate's coins. Even more provocatively, he claimed to decipher around the coin's edge the faint, partial letters UCI. He interpreted this as a fragment of the Greek inscription Tiberoukaiosros, meaning of Tiberius Caesar, which encircled Pilate's leptons. Here was a claim of breathtaking precision, a hidden signature from the exact time and place of the crucifixion, pressed into the very fabric of history. The implications were seismic. It suggested the shroud's image contained not just a generic human form, but a catalogue of specific, datable objects from a single moment in time. For many, this was the smoking gun, the tiny piece of physical evidence that could anchor the entire shroud to a specific Friday in Jerusalem. Yet, as with every aspect of this relic, the coin theory sparked an immediate and furious scholarly debate. Numismatists and skeptical scientists pushed back hard. They argued the markings on the shroud are far too vague and ambiguous to be definitively identified. The human brain is exceptionally good at finding patterns, a phenomenon called pareidolia, where we see familiar shapes in random clouds or stains on a wall. Could researchers like feelers have been seeing what they desperately wanted to see in the faint, mottled discolorations of the linen? Critics pointed out that the supposed letters are incomplete and open to multiple interpretations, and that the curved staff symbol is not unique to Pilate's coins. Furthermore, there is no solid historical or archaeological evidence that placing coins on the eyes was a standard Jewish burial practice in the 1st century. The theory rests on a later custom, primarily Greek and Roman, and its application to a Judean context is speculative. The debate ultimately reaches a frustrating stalemate. Proponents see a clear, identifiable match that adds a layer of incredible historical specificity. Detractors see psychological projection onto a random texture, an example of the mystery shaping the evidence rather than the other way around. This tiny detail over the eyes encapsulates the entire shroud dilemma in miniature, a potential clue of immense power forever hovering just beyond the reach of absolute proof. While the coin theory remains locked in debate, another ancient cloth offers a different kind of testimony, one written entirely in blood. Housed in the Cathedral of Oviedo in northern Spain is a relic known as the sudarium, a small linen cloth measuring roughly 34 by 21 inches. Its history is not shrouded in medieval mystery but recorded in a clear, traceable line. Ancient documents state this cloth arrived in Spain from Jerusalem in a precious ark in the early 7th century, fleeing the advance of Persian invaders. This places its documented existence centuries before the shroud first appeared in France. Tradition holds this is the sudarium mentioned in the Gospel of John, the face cloth that covered the head of Jesus in the tomb. Unlike the shroud, the sudarium of Oviedo bears no mysterious image, only a stark and brutal map of stains, the evidence of a violent death. Forensic analysis of this cloth has produced findings that resonate with the shroud in eerie, specific ways. The pattern of stains is complex, showing a primary flow from the nose and mouth, consistent with pulmonary edema, a fluid buildup in the lungs that is a known effect of crucifixion. The stains indicate the cloth was wrapped around the head of a corpse in a specific sequence, first while the body was upright, perhaps still on the cross, and then later after being laid horizontally. This matches the Gospel account of Jesus being taken down from the cross, but the most compelling connections are in the details. Studies of the blood on the sudarium have identified it as type AB, a relatively rare blood type. Remarkably, earlier studies on the shroud's purported bloodstains also suggested type AB. While blood typing from ancient stains is controversial and not definitive, the correlation is provocative. Even more striking are the geometrical comparisons. Researchers have overlaid photographs of the sudarium's stain patterns with the corresponding facial area of the Shroud of Turin. They claim the stains align with the blood flows on the shroud's image, particularly around the hair, beard, and the wounds from the crown of thorns. The dimensions match, the angles of flow match, and the points of origin seem to correspond. It is as if one cloth recorded the source of the bleeding, and the other recorded the resulting patterns on the skin. If these two separate relics with independent histories separated by hundreds of miles both touch the same crucified man, the implications are enormous. It would mean the shroud must be at least as old as the sudarium's documented journey to Spain in the early 600s, pushing its origin back centuries before the medieval carbon date of 1260 to 1390. This would not just challenge the carbon test, it would shatter it, suggesting the sampled piece was indeed contaminated or repaired. The sudarium presents a tangible, historical anchor that the shroud lacks on its own. Its well-documented journey from Jerusalem to Spain provides a plausible pathway for such a relic, a pathway the shroud's own early history mysteriously lacks. For those who believe, the two cloths form a powerful, corroborating pair, a forensic dossier from the same tragic event. For skeptics, the connections are coincidental or the result of biased interpretation, another case of seeing patterns where none exist. Yet the question persists: if the shroud is a clever medieval forgery from France, created with no knowledge of this Spanish relic, how could its blood-stained patterns and purported blood type align so precisely with a cloth that had been in Oviedo for over 700 years? The sudarium does not solve the mystery of the shroud's image, but it asks a profound and unsettling question about its origin, one that science alone has yet to answer. The shroud's survival for over 600 years is a miracle of its own, a story written in fire, water, and desperate human courage. After its contested debut in France, the cloth passed through the hands of nobility, eventually coming into the possession of the powerful House of Savoy in the 1500s. In 1578, it made its final journey, carried in a solemn procession to the Savoyard capital of Turin, Italy, where it has remained ever since, housed in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. But its home would become the stage for its most perilous trials. The first great fire struck in 1532, while the shroud was kept in a chapel in Chambéry, France. A blaze swept through the building, and a drop of molten silver from its reliquary burned right through the folded linen, leaving the distinctive, matched set of triangular scorch marks and holes we see today. The cloth was saved, but barely, and the nuns of the Order of St. Clare painstakingly sewed a backing cloth, known as the Holland cloth, and applied a series of patches to cover the damage. This act of preservation, however, would later become a source of immense scientific controversy. Centuries later, in the dead of night on April 11, 1997, disaster struck again. A fierce fire, likely caused by an electrical fault, erupted in the Guarini chapel of the Turin Cathedral, the very room where the shroud was displayed in its bulletproof case. Flames roared up the ancient wooden walls and engulfed the chapel's dome, sending a rain of molten lead and blazing debris crashing down toward the altar. The temperature inside the case soared past 1,000 degrees Celsius. For over an hour, it seemed certain the relic would be reduced to ashes. The iconic image from that night is not of the cloth, but of a firefighter, Mario Tremata, using his bare hands and a sledgehammer to smash through 4 layers of bulletproof glass after the electronic release mechanism failed. He emerged from the smoke carrying the 200-pound silver casket, its surface scorched and warped by the heat. Inside, the shroud was saved, protected by the case that had nearly become its oven. The world held its breath, and when the cloth was examined days later, it was found to be unharmed, save for a single, small water stain from the firefighter's hoses. This brush with annihilation was a stark reminder of the relic's terrifying fragility. The near destruction in 1997 set the stage for a bold and contentious decision. In 2002, a team of textile experts and scientists, led by Swiss restorer Mechthild Fleury-Lemberg, undertook a radical restoration. For centuries, the shroud had been displayed with its back hidden, sewn to the Holland cloth and reinforced with the 30 patches applied after the 1532 fire. The team carefully removed all of this medieval and Renaissance stitching. They detached the backing cloth, took off every one of the patches, and for the first time in over 400 years, the reverse side of the shroud was exposed. They then attached a new, state-of-the-art backing cloth for support and stored the original linen flat in a specially designed, inert gas-filled case to prevent further decay. The goal was pure preservation, to halt any ongoing damage from the old, stressed stitches and acidic materials. But the project ignited a firestorm of criticism from the scientific community. Many researchers were furious they were not consulted. They argued that the restoration destroyed potential evidence such as loose threads, pollen grains, or other particulates trapped between the shroud and its backing that could have been analyzed with new technologies. The removal of the patches, they said, erased historical data about the cloth's handling and the specific repair techniques used after the Chambéry fire. While the restoration likely ensured the shroud's physical survival for centuries to come, it also permanently sealed away layers of its own history, making future study of those lost details impossible. This tension between protecting a sacred object and unlocking its secrets is the central, heartbreaking conflict of the shroud's modern story. Every decision is a gamble, balancing the risk of loss against the hope of understanding, a dilemma that will follow this enigmatic cloth as long as it endures. The true strangeness of the shroud's image lies not in what our eyes can see, but in the hidden data they cannot. For centuries, observers looked at the faint, sepia-toned figure and saw a flat, ghostly picture. But in the 1970s, a group of scientists led by physicist John Jackson made a discovery that shattered that perception forever. They were using a device called a VP8 image analyzer, a machine built for NASA to interpret the light and shadow data in satellite photos of the Moon and Mars, turning flat images into three-dimensional terrain maps. On a whim, they fed a photograph of the shroud into the machine. What emerged was not a flat picture, but a fully formed, three-dimensional sculpture of a human face and body. The machine's software, designed to read altitude from variations in light, had found something extraordinary in the shroud's faint stains, a perfect, consistent relationship between image darkness and physical distance. The darker a pixel was on the cloth, the closer the linen had been to the body at that point. The tip of the nose, pressed directly against the fabric, registered as a bright highlight, meaning it was very close. The hollows of the eyes and cheeks, where the cloth draped a fraction of an inch away, registered as darker shadows. The scourge marks, the wound on the side, the contours of the lips, every single feature was mapped with precise, measurable depth. The shroud was not a painting, it was a topographical map of a human form, encoded in shades of yellow on linen. Think of it like a modern 3D scanner in a doctor's office, which uses lasers to measure the exact distance to every point on your face, creating a digital model. The shroud's image contains that same type of distance data, but it was created by a process we still cannot replicate. This property is utterly unique in the entire history of art. An artist, whether medieval or modern, creates a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional world. They use shadow and perspective to trick the eye into seeing depth, but the paint on the canvas is all at the same physical level. If you fed the Mona Lisa or a Rembrandt portrait into that VP8 analyzer, you would get a distorted, lumpy mess because the darkness of the paint relates to artistic choices about light, not to the actual distance between the subject and the canvas. The machine would interpret a dark shadow in a painted eye socket as a deep hole, and a highlighted cheek as a protruding mountain, creating a grotesque, unrealistic model. Only the Shroud of Turin, out of every image ever tested, produces a perfectly coherent, anatomically correct 3D model. This single fact is arguably the most powerful scientific argument against forgery. It asks a question that no theory of medieval artistry can answer. How could a forger, working over 600 years ago, encode precise, millimeter-accurate distance information into a cloth using a method that left no physical pigment behind, to create an effect that would only be detectable by technology invented in the 20th century? The artist would have needed to unconsciously know the exact contour of every part of the body, then translate that invisible depth data into just the right shade of stain, a feat of subconscious measurement and execution beyond any human capability. The 3D data points to a cause that was not an artist's hand, but a physical event, one that recorded the space between a body and a sheet of linen in a single, mysterious instant. So let's take a breath and step back from the individual pieces of evidence. Forget the carbon dating, the pollen, the blood type debate for just a moment. Look instead at the complete, finished object. We are asked to believe a single, unnamed artisan in the 1300s created the Shroud of Turin. To accept that, we must also accept the staggering list of things this person would have needed to know and accomplish, a list that grows more impossible with every new discovery. First, they would have required a mastery of human anatomy far beyond any medieval physician. They would have needed to know, for instance, that crucifixion nails were driven through the wrists, not the palms, a forensic detail lost to history and contrary to all contemporary art. They would have needed to understand the precise pattern of wounds from a Roman flagrum whip, the flow of blood from scalp wounds caused by a cap of thorns, and the post-mortem seepage of serum to create perfect halos around each bloodstain. This forger would have been a secret genius of pathology. Second, they would have needed to invent the concept of photography over 400 years before the first camera. They would have had to conceive of a negative image, a concept with no cultural or scientific reference point in their time, and then execute it flawlessly. Third, they would have needed to understand three-dimensional data encoding. They would have had to somehow measure and then translate the exact distance between a body and a draped cloth into minute variations of stain intensity, creating a perfect topographical map that would only be decipherable by a computer in the 1970s. Fourth, they would have needed to develop a painting technique that used no paint, no brush strokes, no binder, and left coloration only on the topmost micron of each linen thread, a technique so advanced it continues to elude replication by modern scientists with lasers. Fifth, they would have needed the historical foresight to weave their canvas using an obscure, first-century herringbone twill pattern, and to sew its seams with an extinct stitch from ancient Judea, details no one would appreciate or likely even notice for centuries. And finally, they would have had to do all of this without leaving a single note, boast, or record of their monumental achievement, vanishing into history as a silent, anonymous master. This portrait of the forger strains belief. It describes not a cunning medieval craftsman, but a trans-historical polymath, a figure who combined the skills of a forensic pathologist, a master painter, a pioneering photographer, a textile historian, and a quantum physicist, all while leaving behind a single, unsigned work that sparked a mystery lasting 700 years. The weight of this synthesis pushes many to a simple conclusion. The image on the shroud was not made by an artist's hand. Its origin lies not in the slow, deliberate process of creation, but in a singular, instantaneous event, a burst of energy or a moment of transfiguration that wrote itself onto the cloth in a language of light and chemistry we are still struggling to read. The evidence, when assembled, points less to a forgery and more to a photograph of the impossible. This relentless quest for answers has created an entire world of its own, a community of thinkers, dreamers, and detectives known as Sindonologists. Their name comes from the Greek word for shroud, sindon, and within their ranks you will find one of the most fascinating human spectrums imaginable. On one end stand devout believers for whom the shroud is not merely an artifact but a tangible sign, a divine photograph offering silent proof of the resurrection. Their research is often driven by a profound sense of faith seeking understanding, an attempt to reconcile the cloth's scientific mysteries with their spiritual convictions. Then there are the secular scientists, the chemists, physicists, and forensic experts who may hold no particular religious belief about the cloth. They are drawn purely by the intellectual puzzle, by an object that defies every known process of image making. They treat it as the ultimate cold case, a challenge to the very boundaries of their disciplines. And on the far other end are the ardent skeptics like investigator Joe Nickell, who approach the shroud as a masterpiece of medieval deception. Nickel and others have dedicated years to replicating its features using period-appropriate methods, from pigment transfers to rubbing techniques, aiming to prove human ingenuity is the only miracle required. This collision of worldviews transforms academic conferences into theaters of high passion. Picture a lecture hall where a physicist presents complex data on ultraviolet laser scorching, followed by a historian detailing the lucrative trade in fake relics in the 1300s. The question and answer sessions can crackle with tension. A believer might ask a skeptic with genuine curiosity how a forger could encode three-dimensional data he couldn't perceive. A skeptic might counter a scientist, questioning whether the desire for a miraculous answer is clouding the interpretation of a flawed carbon sample. These are not dry, academic disputes. Voices can rise, papers can be waived, and the fundamental nature of evidence itself is debated. Is faith a valid lens through which to examine data? Can science ever truly capture or dismiss a claim of the supernatural? The Shroud forces these questions into the open, blurring lines we often keep neatly separated. At its heart, Sindonology reveals that this mystery is not just about flax fibers and chemical stains. It is about people. It is about the archaeologist who spends decades studying first-century textiles, hoping to find a match. It is about the retired doctor who pores over the wound marks, diagnosing the cause of death from a 2,000-year-old image. It is about the artist who tries and fails to recreate the shroud's ghostly negative in her studio. Each person brings their own history, their own hopes, and their own definition of truth to the same piece of linen. This human dimension is what keeps the mystery alive, fueling a debate that is as much about who we are and what we are willing to believe as it is about what happened in a Jerusalem tomb centuries ago. The cloth is silent, but the conversation it sparks is endlessly, passionately loud. The digital age has given us new eyes to see this ancient cloth, revealing layers of information invisible for centuries. In 2008, during a rare public exhibition, the shroud was photographed with staggering clarity, using a state-of-the-art digital camera with a resolution of 1.3 billion pixels. This created a master file so immense and detailed that researchers could zoom in to examine individual threads from their computers thousands of miles away. This was not just a better picture, it was a new artifact, a perfect digital twin that could be analyzed, measured, and manipulated without ever touching the fragile original. Scientists began applying sophisticated mathematical tools to this data, like Fourier transform and wavelet analysis. These are techniques that break down an image's complex texture into its component frequencies, much like a musical chord can be separated into its individual notes. The goal was to understand the fundamental signal of the image, to distinguish it from the noise of the cloth's weave, stains, and fire damage. These analyses reinforced the image's most baffling property, its lack of directionality. There is no brushstroke signature, no consistent flow that would indicate a hand applying a medium. The image data appears as a random, isotropic pattern, consistent with a brief, uniform burst of energy affecting the cloth's surface rather than a deliberate, directional application. Perhaps the most controversial digital discoveries, however, involve things that were never meant to be seen at all. Over the years, various researchers have claimed to detect faint letters and inscriptions hidden within the weave of the cloth, hovering around the face like a ghostly caption. Using image enhancement software to adjust contrast and isolate patterns, they report seeing fragments of Greek, Latin, and even Aramaic letters. Words like Nazareth or phrases like in the tomb have been proposed, suggesting a hidden label identifying the man in the shroud. These claims capture the imagination, offering the tantalizing possibility of a direct textual link to the 1st century. Yet the mainstream scientific community remains deeply skeptical. The primary criticism is pareidolia, our brain's powerful tendency to find meaningful shapes in random patterns. In the complex, mottled texture of linen, especially where water stains and scorch marks intersect. It is statistically likely that some arrangements of threads will accidentally resemble letters. Different researchers using different enhancement settings often see completely different words or nothing at all. There is no consensus, and without a clear, reproducible method for extracting these inscriptions, they remain in the realm of intriguing speculation rather than accepted evidence. Yet even these contested findings reveal something profound about the shroud in the 21st century. It has become a living laboratory. Each new technological advance, from gigapixel photography to advanced spectral analysis, is turned upon its surface, generating fresh data and new, often conflicting interpretations. The cycle of claim and counterclaim continues, not because the mystery is shrinking, but because our tools for probing it are growing more powerful. The cloth sits silently in its climate-controlled case in Turin, while around the world, its digital echo sparks endless debate on computer screens, in online forums, and in virtual conferences, ensuring that this medieval mystery remains stubbornly, vibrantly modern. Amidst the clamor of scientific debate and public fascination, one voice holds a unique, quiet authority: the Vatican itself. The Catholic Church is not merely an interested observer in the shroud story. It is the legal owner and guardian of the relic, a responsibility it has held since the House of Savoy bequeathed it to the Holy See in 1983. Yet its official position is a masterpiece of nuance, a deliberate and thoughtful stance that has shaped the modern conversation. The Church has never formally declared the Shroud of Turin to be the authentic burial cloth of Jesus Christ. Instead, it encourages the faithful to venerate it as a powerful icon of Christ's passion. This is a crucial distinction. An icon, in the religious sense, is not worshipped as an object itself, but is revered as a window to the divine, a sacred image that focuses devotion and inspires contemplation of the deeper spiritual reality it represents. By framing the shroud this way, the Church separates the question of historical provenance from the power of spiritual meaning. It says, in essence, that whether this cloth touched the body of Christ in the 1st century or was crafted by a devout hand in the 14th, its value lies in what it points to: the profound mystery of suffering, death, and the hope of resurrection. This position creates a remarkable space where faith and uncertainty can coexist. A believer can stand before the shroud, moved by its stark depiction of sacrifice, without needing a scientific certificate of authenticity. A skeptic can acknowledge its profound impact as a cultural and artistic object without dismissing the genuine devotion it inspires. The Church's role as a custodian, rather than a prosecutor of the mystery, allows the shroud to function primarily as a spiritual catalyst. This is most visibly demonstrated during the rare public exhibitions known as ostentioni. For a few weeks, every few decades, the cloth is removed from its climate-controlled case and displayed behind thick, bulletproof glass in the Cathedral of Turin. The response is staggering. Millions of pilgrims from across the globe wait in lines that stretch for hours for a brief moment, often just a few minutes, to stand in its presence. They are not coming to conduct a forensic examination. They come to pray, to weep, to seek solace, or simply to witness an object that has captivated humanity for centuries. The silence in the cathedral during these viewings is profound, a collective, reverent hush broken only by soft footsteps and whispered prayers. For these pilgrims, the unresolved scientific debate fades into the background. What matters is the immediate, visceral encounter with an image that tells the oldest story of sacrifice and hope in the most human terms possible. The Vatican's nuanced stewardship ensures the shroud remains, above all else, a mirror. It reflects not a definitive answer, but the deepest questions of the human heart, inviting each person who encounters it to find their own meaning in its silent, ghostly gaze. But what if the shroud did exist long before its official debut in France? To find a plausible earlier history, we must follow a trail of whispers and legends, leading to a lost relic and a persecuted order of warrior monks. This path begins not in the 1400s but in the ancient city of Edessa in what is now Turkey. As early as the 6th century, historical records speak of a sacred cloth known as the Mandilion of Edessa. This was not a full burial shroud, but a small, rectangular cloth believed to bear the miraculous imprint of Christ's face, created when he pressed it to his features. The Mandilion was a revered icon credited with protecting the city from invaders, and its history is documented through centuries, moving from Edessa to Constantinople in the year 944. Then in 1204, something catastrophic happened. The armies of the Fourth Crusade, supposedly Christian knights, brutally sacked Constantinople, looting its unimaginable treasures. In the chaos, the Mandilion vanished from history. Its fate is unknown, but its description is tantalizing. Some accounts suggest it was not a small face cloth at all, but a much larger piece of linen, folded and presented in a frame so that only the face was visible. Could the Mandilion and the Shroud of Turin be one and the same object, a full-length burial cloth whose true nature was hidden for centuries, known only by its most visible feature, the haunting face? This theory provides a potential bridge across the shroud's historical silence, offering a documented existence from the 6th to the 13th century that the carbon dating cannot account for. The disappearance of the Mandilion creates a perfect vacuum, a moment when a sacred cloth of Christ could have entered the shadows of history only to re-emerge transformed. And the most likely candidates to have taken it from the burning ruins of Constantinople were the most powerful and secretive warriors of their age, the Knights Templar. This military order, founded to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, grew into a vast international network of banking and influence. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the Templars, moved to destroy them. He ordered the arrest of every Templar in France on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and idolatry. Under brutal torture, many knights confessed to worshipping a mysterious head or idol they called Baphomet. The descriptions from these coerced confessions are vague and contradictory, but some spoke of a bearded male head on a cloth or a painted figure. Could Baphomet have been a twisted, misunderstood reference to their secret veneration of the shroud, the very image of Christ? If the Templars had rescued the Mandilion from Constantinople, they would have guarded it as their most sacred treasure, a direct link to the founder of their faith. Its clandestine worship would explain the charges of idolatry. The theory gains a fascinating personal connection when we return to our starting point, Geoffroy de Charny, the French knight who first presented the shroud in 1354. Historical research reveals a stunning link. Geoffroy was the nephew of another Geoffroy de Charny, a Templar knight who was burned at the stake with the order's last Grand Master in 1314. It is a compelling thread, a direct familial line from a martyred Templar to the man who brought the shroud into the light just a generation later. Perhaps the cloth was a hidden heirloom, passed down through a loyal family line after the order's destruction, waiting for a safer time to be revealed. This narrative weaves the shroud into the grand tapestry of crusades, fallen empires, and knightly orders. It answers the vexing question of where the shroud was before 1354, placing it on a documented journey from Edessa to Constantinople and then into the hands of the Templars. It transforms the cloth from a sudden medieval invention into a lost relic with a fragmented but traceable pedigree, a holy secret that survived persecution and fire long before the flames of Chambéry ever touched it. Of course, this remains historical speculation, a beautiful story built on circumstantial links and the silent gaps in the record. There is no smoking gun, no inventory from a Templar treasury that lists the shroud. Yet it offers a powerful and emotionally resonant alternative, a hidden history that feels worthy of the object's profound mystery. It suggests the shroud's journey through time was not a straight line, but a secret passage, carried in darkness by those who believed it was worth any sacrifice. The shroud's true power may lie not in its linen fibers, but in the human mind. It operates on a level deeper than evidence, functioning as a psychological and cultural mirror. For centuries, a specific term has been used for such objects, akeropoieton, a Greek word meaning not made by human hands. This is not just a description, it is a category of the sacred, reserved for images believed to have a divine origin, like the Veil of Veronica or the icon of Our Lady of Kazan. The shroud is the ultimate akeropoieton, a physical object that claims to bypass human artistry entirely, pointing directly to a moment of supernatural intervention. This claim, whether ultimately true or not, grants it a unique authority. It is not a saint's interpretation of an event or an artist's devotional painting. It presents itself as raw, unmediated data, a direct imprint from a source beyond us. This is why it commands such awe. It offers the tantalizing possibility of touching the untouchable, of seeing a moment that defies ordinary sight. In this way, the shroud acts as a profound Rorschach test for the modern world. What you see in its faint stains reveals your own worldview. For the person of faith, it is a tangible anchor, a piece of physical proof that validates a spiritual truth. The wounds match the scriptures, the suffering feels real, and the mysterious image suggests a resurrection event that left a mark on reality itself. It transforms belief from an abstract concept into something that can, in theory, be photographed and measured. For the scientist, it is the ultimate intellectual puzzle, a cold case that defies every known law of image formation. The lack of pigment, the three-dimensional data, the encoded distance information, these are not mysteries of faith but challenges to physics and chemistry. The scientist sees a problem to be solved, a set of data points that demand a natural explanation, even if that explanation remains elusive. For the artist or historian, the shroud represents a staggering, if anonymous, feat of human genius. Whether as a medieval forger of unimaginable skill or as the subject of a lost artistic technique, it stands as a masterpiece of representation, capturing human suffering and dignity with a rawness that few artworks ever achieve. Each perspective is valid, each sees a different facet of the same object. This is why the debate never ends. The shroud exists at a rare and volatile intersection, where religion, history, art, and science all meet and demand answers from the same piece of cloth. A theologian asks what it means, a historian asks where it has been, an artist asks how it was made, and a physicist asks what force created it. No single discipline can claim it entirely, and this shared custody is what keeps the mystery alive. It becomes a perfect vessel for our deepest, most fundamental questions. How do we know what is true? What constitutes proof? Where is the line between a natural phenomenon and a miraculous event? Can science ever investigate a claim of the supernatural, or are the two realms forever separate? The shroud forces these questions out of textbooks and into the open, making them urgent and personal. We are not just analyzing linen, we are grappling with the limits of our own understanding. In its silent presence, we confront the tension between the desire for empirical certainty and the longing for transcendent meaning. The cloth does not provide an answer, instead it holds up a mirror, asking us to consider not only what it is, but what we are looking for when we gaze upon it. These unresolved threads weave together into a core set of questions, each one a locked door in the heart of the mystery. The first and perhaps most baffling, why is the image a perfect photographic negative? This is not a stylistic choice or an accident of decay. The shroud presents a precise, coherent negative image where light and dark are perfectly inverted to form a positive picture only when photographed. This concept was utterly foreign to human understanding until the 19th century. A medieval forger would have no framework, no reference point, and no reason to create such a thing. He would be painting a hidden solution to a puzzle that would not exist for 500 years. So what natural or supernatural process inverts visual information with such flawless precision, and then leaves no physical medium behind to explain how it was done? This leads directly to the second, equally perplexing question. How does the image encode three-dimensional data? The darkness on the cloth is not random, it is a precise measurement. Each subtle variation in shade corresponds exactly to the distance that once existed between the body and the linen sheet. The tip of the nose, the brow, the knees, these closer points are lighter. The hollows of the eyes, the cheeks, the abdomen, these more distant points are darker. This encoded depth information is what allowed scientists to generate a perfect 3D model. No painting, sculpture, or any other artwork in history possesses this property. An artist creates an illusion of depth. The shroud contains a mathematical record of it. So we must ask, what event or mechanism could possibly scan a human form, measure these minute distances in three-dimensional space, and then translate that data into a perfect gradient of discoloration on a piece of cloth? Then we confront the forensic puzzle. Why does the blood appear so anatomically and chemically accurate if this is all a forgery? The bloodstains show serum halos, evidence of real clotting. They follow gravity-driven paths from wounds in the scalp, wrists, and side. Chemical analyses suggest the presence of bilirubin, a marker of extreme trauma. To create this, a forger would need an encyclopedic knowledge of hematology, forensics, and pathology that simply did not exist. He would have to know to paint not just blood, but the clear serum that separates from it, and he would have to apply it in patterns that medical science would only later confirm as accurate for a crucified victim. Is this the work of unimaginable, intuitive luck, or is it the residue of a real, terrible event? The physical evidence from the cloth itself raises its own stubborn questions. What about the pollen grains and the unique textile evidence? The claim of Middle Eastern pollen, while contested, suggests a journey. The specific 3/1 herringbone twill and the extinct 1st century sewing stitch on the selvage seam are technical fingerprints. If the shroud is a medieval European creation, why would its maker go to such extraordinary, invisible lengths to source a historically accurate fabric and use a forgotten stitching technique from ancient Judea? These are details no one would ever see or appreciate, serving no purpose for a forgery meant to inspire pilgrims. They are whispers of an origin story that contradicts the carbon date. And this brings us to the great historical silence, the most practical question of all. If the shroud is truly from the 1st century, how did it survive completely undocumented for 1,300 years? The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but it is a profound vacuum. For a relic of this potential magnitude to leave no written trace, no mention in chronicles, no record in church inventories from Jerusalem to Constantinople, seems almost as miraculous as the image itself. Did it travel in secrecy, guarded by a select few? Was it folded and presented as the mandilion, its full nature hidden? Or does its sudden appearance in the 1300s simply tell us the most likely truth about its origin? This question challenges believers and historians alike, for it asks us to accept a narrative of survival against impossible odds, or to accept a medieval genesis that cannot explain the object's own physical properties. Each of these questions is a knot that no single theory has yet been able to fully untie. The radiation hypothesis explains the 3D data and the superficial image, but feels miraculous. The Maillard reaction offers a natural chemical process, but cannot account for the sharp details and encoded depth. The medieval forgery theory answers the historical timeline, but requires a list of anachronistic skills that defy belief. We are left circling the same impossible object, viewing it through different lenses, each one clarifying one aspect while blurring another. The enduring power of the shroud lies in this very incompleteness. It refuses to be solved, ensuring that the search for answers and the debate over what they might mean will continue as long as the faint image on the linen continues to gaze back at us. Yet the story of the shroud is not over, because science never stops looking forward. The next chapter in this ancient mystery may be written not with a scalpel or a laser, but with the quiet hum of a next-generation particle accelerator. The debate over the carbon dating from 1988 remains the single greatest roadblock to consensus, a fact that both frustrates and motivates researchers. There is a powerful, growing desire within the scientific community to conduct a new round of radiocarbon tests, but this time with a crucial evolution. The goal is to use vastly smaller samples, perhaps just milligrams of material extracted from single threads using micro-sampling techniques, and to take them from multiple, carefully vetted locations across the cloth, far from the heavily handled and fire-damaged edge tested before. Even more promising are emerging methods like non-destructive dating, where a particle beam is directed at the cloth to measure specific isotopes without cutting or harming it at all. Imagine being able to read the age of the linen as easily as scanning a barcode, leaving the relic utterly untouched. The resistance to this idea is equally strong, rooted in a deep-seated protective instinct. The Church, as guardian, must weigh the thirst for knowledge against the risk of irreversible damage. Every thread cut is a piece of history lost forever. The question becomes, is the potential for a definitive answer worth the physical cost to an object that has survived fire and war for centuries? This tension between discovery and preservation is the central drama of the Shroud's future. Beyond dating, the real breakthroughs may come from analyzing what the cloth has collected, not just what it is made of. Trapped within the intricate weave of the linen, invisible to the naked eye, is a hidden archive. It is a time capsule of dust, pollen, and perhaps most intriguingly, environmental DNA. Advanced genomic sequencing techniques, now exponentially more powerful than they were just a decade ago, could theoretically analyze the microscopic debris vacuumed from between the threads. This isn't about finding the DNA of the central figure. That is a scientific fantasy given degradation and contamination. Instead, it is about reading the genetic signatures of everyone and everything that ever came near it. The dust might hold traces of the people who wove it, those who carried it, the environments it passed through, from Jerusalem's arid hills to Europe's damp chapels. It could reveal the microbial ecosystems that lived on its surface, each a clue to its journey through time and space. Similarly, spectroscopic imaging, using every wavelength from infrared to X-ray, could map the chemical composition of the entire cloth in staggering detail, creating a full molecular portrait that might finally identify the exact nature of the image-forming process, distinguishing once and for all between a chemical reaction, a spectral stain, or something else entirely. Perhaps the most democratic shift in Shroud research will come from data, not access to the physical object. The high-resolution, multi-spectral images already captured could be released in full to a global community of researchers, programmers, and curious minds. This is the model of crowdsourced science that has mapped distant galaxies and folded proteins. An online platform could allow a physicist in Tokyo, a textile expert in Cairo, and a graduate student in Buenos Aires to apply their own algorithms, run their own analyses, and share their findings in an open, collaborative forum. The mystery would no longer be confined to a select few with the privilege of proximity. It would become a planetary puzzle. This open-source approach could accelerate discovery in unpredictable ways as fresh eyes and novel computational techniques are brought to bear on the ancient image. The final answers about the Shroud of Turin may not come from a single, authorized test, but from the accumulated weight of 1,000 small observations shared across the world. The anticipation lies in knowing that our tools for seeing the invisible are growing more powerful every day, and that this silent piece of linen, having guarded its secrets for so long, may yet have more to reveal to those who learn how to ask the right questions. So we are left with two competing realities, each with its own compelling weight of evidence. Picture a scale, an ancient balance from a merchant's stall. On one tray, we place the arguments for a medieval origin, This side holds the heavy, definitive weight of the 1988 carbon dating, a scientific measurement from 3 independent laboratories that pins the linen's creation squarely between 1260 and 1390 Anno Domini. Alongside it rests the profound historical silence, the complete absence of any credible mention, artistic reference, or documented chain of custody for the shroud before its sudden appearance in 1354 France. These are not minor details, they are foundational. They represent the bedrock of historical method and archaeological science. If we trust these tools, the case seems clear. The shroud is a medieval artifact, and its mystery is one of technique, not provenance. The burden of proof, therefore, lies entirely with those who claim it is older. Now, onto the opposite tray, we carefully set the evidence for an ancient, inexplicable origin. Here we place the physical enigma of the image itself, a superficial, scorch-like stain with no pigment or brushstrokes that forms a perfect photographic negative and encodes precise 3-dimensional data. Next to it, we add the forensic library of the body, the anatomically correct wounds from a Roman flagrum. The blood flows with their serum halos, the piercing through the wrists, and the suggested presence of bilirubin. Then come the textile clues, the rare herringbone twill and the extinct 1st century sewing stitch on the seam. Finally, we add the contested but persistent whispers of Middle Eastern pollen grains. This side of the scale does not offer a single, neat date. Instead, it presents a cascade of anomalies, a list of things that a medieval forger should not have known, could not have done, and would have had no reason to attempt. The weight here is not a number, but a profound question. How could a single artisan in the 1300s accomplish all of this? The two sides do not gently balance, they strain against each other, the clean, numerical certainty of one straining against the intricate, inexplicable complexity of the other. This is the core of the enigma. It is not that the evidence is weak, it is that the evidence is strong, but it points in 2 diametrically opposed directions. We are not in a simple state of not knowing, we are in a state of knowing too much, and that knowledge refuses to reconcile. The carbon date and the historical record tell a coherent story of medieval creation. The image's physical and forensic properties tell a coherent story of a 1st century passion event, recorded by a process beyond our understanding. But these 2 stories cannot both be true of the same object, at least not within our current framework of reality. This leaves us in a fascinating and frustrating limbo. To accept the shroud as medieval, you must believe in a forger of such impossible, anachronistic genius that his very existence becomes a kind of miracle. To accept it as ancient, you must believe that a pivotal moment in spiritual history left a physical, investigible residue, and that this object then vanished from all records for over a millennium, only to reappear. Both require a leap, one over the boundaries of human capability, the other over the gaps of history. The shroud endures because it masterfully refuses to let either side declare victory. It is a perfect paradox, a relic that has been tested by the finest tools of science and historiography, only to have those tools deliver a verdict of profound and enduring mystery. We are left not with an answer, but with a choice of which impossibility we find more compelling. We have walked a long road together, from a French chapel in the 1300s to the cutting-edge laboratories of the 21st century. We have seen carbon atoms counted, bloodstains analyzed, and 3-dimensional maps drawn from a ghostly stain. We have heard the theories, from bursts of divine light to the quiet chemistry of decay, from the cunning of a medieval master to the secret history of the Knights Templar. This journey through the Shroud of Turin reveals something far greater than the sum of its evidence. It is more than a piece of linen, more than a scientific conundrum. It is a mirror. It reflects our deepest human yearning to touch the untouchable, to find a solid anchor for our most profound beliefs in the physical world. It holds a stark image of suffering that demands compassion, and a mystery of origin that challenges the very limits of our understanding. Whether you see in its fibers the sacred imprint of a resurrection, the lost masterpiece of a forgotten genius, or simply history's most stubborn unsolved puzzle, its power is undeniable. It sits at the impossible intersection of faith and reason, a place where every answer seems to generate two new questions. It reminds us that some mysteries are not meant to be solved, only contemplated. They pull us beyond the comfortable edges of what we know, asking us to sit with wonder, with doubt, and with the thrilling possibility that the past may hold wonders we have not yet learned to measure. So now the question returns to you, the viewer, after seeing all the evidence laid bare. What do you think? Is this the silent witness to a moment that changed the world, or is it the ultimate testament to human ingenuity and the enduring power of belief? The debate does not end here, it continues with you. Share your verdict in the comments below and let us know which piece of evidence convinced you the most. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history's greatest enigma, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more journeys into the unknown. The search for answers goes on.